There we are once again. Welcome again to Afghanistan by Afghans and listening to stories of Afghans from across the world. Today's guest is from which part of the world, you may ask? I would say that would be Sydney, Australia, correct? Are you in Sydney or did I just make up the word? I knew you're
Uh,
in Australia.
yeah, I'm in Australia. That's right.
That's right. Yeah, just Sydney as well. So, today we're speaking with Idress Amin, or by his stage name, which I hear we'll get to learn as to what it means, Drez Amin. And I'm very excited. He's a music producer, has done audio engineering on a lot of projects, different projects, some of the artists whom I knew. And that's how I kind of came to know of his work. And I'm very excited to have you on the show, Idris John, or Drez.
Thank you, Misak, for having me. I really appreciate it, making the time. So thank you once again.
Of course, it's I know it's morning there in where you are, and that sun is just hitting your face very nicely, and just you got a nice key light right there. um, the
Yeah.
morning sun. So let's start with the stage name. Where did you come up with it, and why?
Okay. So basically, growing up, well, firstly, I should say, growing up as an Afghan in Australia, I didn't really want to be involved with the Afghan community too much. So I would do everything I can to change my name. And I wasn't friends with Afghans. My friends were non-Afghans, so I was named. I was my nickname was Drez actually amongst my friends.
Mhm.
So, well, amongst my non-Afghan friends mostly. So I think that's where I got the name, and especially my musician friends growing up. So they couldn't really say Idris or Idris. So I just made it easier for them, and they just call me Drez. I'm like, okay. So that was during my high school phase, and then later on, I'm like, no, I should actually be proud of my name and call myself Idris. But I kept Drez because it's still an integral part of my life, and I had really good friends during the time. So I thought, why should I erase the history even of something negative and just blend the two together? I guess that's where I came up with the name and decided to stick with that.
It makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. Uh, I always like to hear and start from the journey of the family and your parents or yourself from Afghanistan to where you are, to give context. So tell us kind of what was that journey like, or how was that journey um, moving
Yeah.
from Afghanistan to Australia, and why? Answer all of them or any of them.
Yeah, sure thing. I guess the best place to start with is through my mother, where she actually fled Afghanistan before she got married to my father. She fled Afghanistan in the 80s. So during the Soviet War, her and her family fled to the US actually, initially. So that's where it all started. And yeah, I guess she already met my dad by that time, and but he was in Afghanistan. So they were separated and they wanted to, I guess, be married and know each other a bit more. So my mom actually left America, went back to Afghanistan for my dad, I guess. And yeah, so she went back home and they met and they got married. From there, they were experiencing some troubles, obviously, as the war was increasing.
This is in
Not
the 80s, right?
Yeah, just close late 80s, closer to the 90s. So I think they were realizing that it's getting dangerous and they need to actually do something about this. So they fled to Pakistan. I can't remember exactly which year it was at the time, but they went to Peshawar in Pakistan. So that's where I was actually born. So one in Peshawar, I was born, and yeah, so they stayed there for about a month, I think,
Mhm.
and then fled back to Kabul once it was a bit more safe. So I think I was born in 1992, and then about 2 3 months later they went back to Kabul.
Mhm.
So I I was I was a baby living in Kabul. I always tell people, yeah, I've been to Afghanistan, but I was just a baby.
In the
uh,
crib.
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
And how old were you when you guys moved back to Sydney,
Yeah, so
Australia?
yeah, we actually got sponsored by a friend of my father's, I believe,
Mhm.
In Australia. So we were sponsored here. I was about 6 months, 8 months old when we fled and arrived
Mhm.
in Australia. So that's the story of how I landed here, down under.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I wonder how it was growing up. I know you went into it about the name and being Afghan there and changing your name to kind of fit in. But other than that, how was it growing up in Australia as an Afghan?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned in the beginning, it was a little bit challenging, especially as a kid, seeing my father trying to get into the workforce and
Mhm.
him experiencing nepotism and a bit of racism at that time. It was actually very high in Australia.
Mhm.
So he was actually like he was trying to work. My dad was he was an IT expert, so he tried to work in those fields and corporate companies, but he kept getting laid off, and it became a pattern. And then he realized it's a little bit like a little bit of racism happening here. I guess that whole thing stuck with me, and I growing up in school, I kind of experienced the sort of same thing, being a brown skin amongst so many light skinned people. But uh, I mean, I tried to move past that kind of thoughts, so I just live my life as normal. However, I kind of over time developed a, what would you say, like a, not hatred, but uh, like a negative thought about Afghan community, because I would compare the two different communities, Australians and Afghans, and be like, okay, why are these people not doing this, and why are they so backwards? So that's, I guess, many Afghan diaspora have, they experience those kind of thoughts. So
Mhm. Yeah.
yes,
That's very common. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it is very common. So yeah, I would say it was challenging, and that's why I had to sort of change my name amongst non-Afghan friends. And
Mhm.
yeah, but later on, I guess during my teenagehood, when I started learning about the Afghan culture, and my dad, who was very proud of his culture, he and I realized I was like sort of musical. He
Mhm.
bought me my first tabla, so that's where it all kind of started in terms of connecting to my roots. So
Yeah.
the tabla itself was a gateway to my Afghan roots. From there on, I just like loved Afghans and everything about it going forth. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And tabla, for audiences who may have not seen or heard of it, you've probably seen it played a lot in Indian music. You know, we got the two drums side by side, a smaller one and a bigger one. Um, and so I want to dig into kind of your interest in music and whether it was you kind of you were interested in learning instruments, or was it something that you said your dad kind of introduced you to? Because you also went on to study IT and such, right? So and work. So tell me a little bit about like the IT side of things, and then let's get into music. Like, why were you into IT
yeah, for
for
sure.
that?
So I mentioned my father was
In
working in
IT,
IT as well. So he was an IT engineer, and he was still is still today. And I was inspired purely by him. He pushed me every day during high school to learn it and follow courses and do as much as possible. Even though I didn't go to university for any IT degree or anything like that. Um, I actually studied audio engineering at a college, so completely different. However, I guess as Afghans, we sort of we grow up to believe to get married, have kids, etc. So you have to support your family. That's why I went down the IT path to sort of
that was the
build
backup plan.
a backup plan. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Right.
So
Okay.
yeah,
And so
yeah,
now kind of coming into music, but your heart is obviously in music. Tell us kind of your journey starting with, so was tabla the first instrument you picked up that you
yeah.
started with, and now you play other things too as well.
Yeah, that's right. So, the funny story with the tabla. When I was about 12 years old, my father bought me the tabla from eBay, and I was just really stoked and excited that it's gonna come. And back in those days, eBay would take forever to arrive. Your packages it would just like take like 4 months or something like that. So
That's
I was
why they're
waiting.
dead.
Yeah, and the funny thing was, yeah, that's right. Yeah, but the funny part was that once, okay, so it was like a day before it arrived. I'm like very excited, and on the day, I opened the package. I open it up and look at all the packaging and all that kind of stuff, and I see there's no tabla in the bag. There's just the box, and I'm like, oh wow. So yeah, I was wondering what's going on, and we realized that the tabla is actually made of animal skin. So like it's actually made of goat skin, and it was picked up by quarantine and all that stuff. So I was really devastated. So I had to wait another 4 months, and
Oh
then
wow.
once the 4 months passed, I finally received the tabla. And by then I was just like, okay, I waited so long for this. I'm so excited to start learning it. So I tried my best to start learning, and my dad actually bought like DVDs and tried to introduce me to certain people in the music industry here who could teach me. Yeah, so that's where it all started. And then uh, I must mention as well, Misach. So my mother was actually very heavily in music as well in Afghanistan. So my inspiration or motivation in music primarily comes from my mother as well.
Uh-huh. Okay. We
So
gotta
she
dig
actually,
into that. Yeah, tell me more. Tell me more about that. Yeah.
yeah, it's like I don't know how to structure this because there's so much going on,
But
but
yeah, what was she doing? What was her involvement in music in Afghanistan?
yeah, so not professionally or commercially, but she used to sing in events in Afghanistan in Kabul. So she actually had a band, and I think it was mostly like university events in the 80s and 70s. So she would sing all the famous songs. Eventually, she wanted to become, I think, a singer, but uh, obviously the parents were pushing her towards academia. So she actually became a doctor instead. So
What a
as
loss. What a loss. We lost like an iconic singer and had just one more doctor.
yeah, exactly, yeah. But
But
yeah, it is what it
but
is.
she has inspired you. I guess did she sing even in Australia? Would she sing at family gatherings, home gatherings and such?
Absolutely, yeah. So especially because we have family in America, and over there, a lot of the Afghan community was have like very induced into Afghan music. So going there on holidays, I would be inspired by all the majlises or little home parties. So that was more the most inspiration I got growing up, and that's pretty much where I started the passion of playing music and tabla and all that kind of music.
Yeah, yeah. You threw another Persian and Farsi or Dari word there, which I want to describe, which is majlis. Like majlis is where people would. Obviously, it means a gathering, but in the Afghan context, there was always music in these gatherings. So when you hear it, you definitely hear music and sound in your ears. Like, oh, I'm going to that.
Yeah,
Like, yeah,
till today we have those parties in our house, in
you
our
do.
family
Okay.
gatherings. Yeah, so that's a standard for us now.
Yeah, yeah. There was my previous guest, Safi John, who's actually a videographer and photographer. He was mentioning how his introduction to the Afghan culture was through music because music is such a huge part of the Afghan cultural heritage, and
Yeah,
you're a cultural bearer of that heritage in that way. So. Not to put a lot of heavy shoulders on your shoulder, but a lot of weight on your shoulder. But tell us, how have you been carrying this cultural heritage with you now in Sydney? Yeah, tell us a little bit about your involvement, some of the projects, wherever you want to start. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. So my involvement in the Afghan community, I would say when I was 16, mostly I would say is through Afghan weddings. To be honest, that's where I started my music career, and through music, I tried to involve myself with the Afghan community in Sydney. So that's where I guess it started. And from there, you meet one person to another, and all these other people who want to build the community in terms of art and music. So from there, I was involved in like every local Afghan community event that I could get my hands on. whether it's paid or not. I was just wanted to be involved.
As a
Um,
teenager, as a 16-year-old,
yeah,
or
so going on, see, I started at 16, and then I guess when I was 18, 19, 20, that's
okay.
where it was the prime of, I guess, my community mission. But one notable event was, I don't know if you've heard of the Skaterstan
Uh-huh. Hmm.
company. So they had an event here. They have some workers in Australia, so they asked us, me and my friends, to come and perform at some of their events, and I think that was really inspiring.
Hmm.
That actually woke me up a little more about Afghanistan, my cultural roots, and wanting to be more involved in community stuff.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, we did some events with them. We actually did some radio interviews with with their group as well, so that was
Right.
interesting.
So Skateistan was this project. I believe it's an NGO initiative, right? Where a bunch of Australians went to Afghanistan to teach kids how to skate and do other things. I didn't know they
Yeah,
had also events in Australia, which is interesting. Um,
yeah.
s-
I think the founder is Australian, if I'm
yes,
not wrong.
of
Yeah,
course. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I heard that. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So you had that, and then you also were producing music for a few Afghan artists. I've seen, right?
Yeah,
How did those come to be, and what did you do in them?
yeah. So basically, I didn't do that initially. I mean, I was doing with my friends here and there, just as a side project. Um, but as I was studying my degree in audio engineering, I was actually trying to be more involved in the non-Afghan industry because I decided, okay, this is what I want to do. Mind you, this is before IT, right? So
Mhm,
I just wanted to pursue a career in music, really, or become an audio engineer.
mhm,
I realized it's a little bit challenging because that industry in Australia has a little bit of nepotism happening as well, even till today. So I was a little bit challenged going to studios and dealing with certain artists, and the behavior towards me wasn't like pleasant.
mhm,
I mean, that kind of made me realize, do I really want to work in this industry? Is it paying me enough? I want to, that's why I guess led me to IT in the beginning as well. But yeah, so I wanted to just continue doing music, but in with Afghans. So I said, no, I'm going to stick with the Afghan community. That's where I started talking to the singers who I'd perform with weddings and be like, okay, you want to make a track? Okay, let's try this and that. But some of the artists I mentioned, so I did some collaborations with them in terms of live performances as well. So, I performed with like Aryana Sayeed, Jawid Sharif, and Sadriddin. Those people were more like live performances. But in terms of music production, I purely stick to my own view here because what I want to do is basically, as a producer, as an Afghan producer, I want to be the forefront instead of in the background. So what that means is I want to be able to create remixes. So if you see today in the Western music industry, there are DJs who are primarily releasing albums, or producers who are like, for example, DJ Khaled. He's producing his own albums and putting his name on it. So I guess that's what I want to do in the Afghan industry.
okay.
Yeah,
To create your own mixes and
yeah,
remixes.
mixes, or even originals. I've got some plans in place at the moment. So as you've seen on my Instagram, I've released mashups and remixes, and that's the path I want to take.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And I obviously is the inspiration behind it is to be able to kind of preserve. I want to see how much of it is your in the thinking process is about preservation of Afghan music and beats. How much of it is your own expression, and it could be a combination, of course. But I kind of wanted to see where the history and current you kind of meet in your thinking process.
Yeah, absolutely. So um, I guess if you look at hip hop music, for example, they use samples of old school music, and that's their way of preserving music with
Mhm.
modern. And essentially, that's what I'm doing with Afghan music. So what I've already done is find Afghan records that are notable, like Ahmad Zayed or any other artist whatever I see, even some instrumentals that are purely Afghan based,
Hmm.
I would use those and convert it into a electronic or hip hop type genre, and that's essentially my goal here, trying to mix, like create a fusion, I'd say.
Okay.
And yeah, that's pretty much the goal here.
The goal here to
Yeah.
do fusion music. What are some other musical inspirations for you other than Afghan music that you like to fuse in your creations, your
Yeah.
influences?
Other than Afghan music, I would
Yeah.
say, yeah, like honestly, I don't stick to Afghan music alone. I like everything in terms of Eastern music. So I grew up listening to a lot of Indian music as well. You listening to Arabic music, Turkish music, anything in the Middle Eastern or Indian range, I would listen to that, and I get inspiration from all of that. So I
Hmm.
want to do things for that wider community as well. But I guess I should mention my main mission here is to bring Afghan music sort of on a global scale and make it more audible to non-Afghans.
Hmm.
Like we haven't reached that stage yet.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah, so that's where I actually that's my goal. I want to
that's your
put
goal.
even
And
like,
how far are you in that, or how do you see that happening? How do you see that happening, and what would be your contribution in that?
okay, the way I see it happening is so there are certain platforms in today, of course, in the internet age, we have Spotify, Apple Music, all that. So you can really scale your music up very quickly these days. So those are the platforms that, I guess that's my strategy to push the music through. Not saying that Afghans aren't already using that, but I feel like they're not using it correctly. So because I guess my IT experience or tech experience helps me, I guess,
Hmm.
push, I guess, put it in the right direction. So put
Yeah,
music in the right
search
direction.
engine friendly.
Yeah, so yeah, that's right. Yeah, marketing it correctly. So that's where I'm headed in terms of scalability for
Hmm.
Afghan music. And but obviously, so like a lot of, so the Afghan industry right now, they're purely basing and making their decisions driven by wedding music, if you already noticed, but they are creating songs like Katagani, for example. So that's another Farsi word if you want to explain that. But like that's the type of music that's being put out there, but not many people in the world can relate to that. Even though it's a good thing to showcase that, however, it's still like a wedding music. So I think Afghan art is way beyond that. We can tap into so many other artworks and styles of music that our forefathers of music did back then, but that's diminished over time, obviously through
Hmm.
war and whatnot. So I guess people like
Yeah.
myself are trying to pick that up again.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. That's really beautiful and commendable that you're trying to do that. And it's much needed. And that kind of gets me, you like how you kind of mentioned all these different countries also that you're tapping into. I'm always interested to hear what each person's personal understanding of Afghan music or whatever art they're involved in. What is it that is unique to you? What do you think is in Afghan music that's worth preserving? Why should it be preserved? What is there so unique about it?
Yeah, so I guess I ask that question myself every day. Why am I wasting my time doing this?
Okay, good. So it's a perfect question. Okay,
Yeah. What,
good.
like, I get that question from family as well. Like, what are you doing? What's the point of hitting the tabla all the time? But I guess it's just it's a beautiful music, firstly, and the compositions that we have, the lyrics, the talent behind the artists. I think that should be showcased because for me, I connected so well to it, and I see the beauty, and I want to unveil that beauty to others as well.
Mhm.
So that's, I think,
And
yeah.
what aspect of it do you connect with? What is it for you? What does it do for you? Because I guess the way I'm thinking of the question is when I listen to music from different genres, it does something different for me, depending on the genre. So when it comes to Afghan music and you wanting to preserve it, what does it do for you?
Even like, I guess spiritually, I connect to it spiritually as well. So
There you go.
it brings a lot of like positive emotions. I mean, I can't live without it anymore. I need to play ambient music every day for me to be able to function in the first place. So that's the first thing.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Connection. There you go. You gave us a little bit. You're like, it's a spiritual connection to the to the
I,
beats.
I'm
And
I'm unveiling things I never talk about. So yeah, thank you for this.
no, that's good. That's the whole point of our conversation. And for those who are kind of listening, whether they be Afghans, non-Afghans, kind of interested more in the Afghan music space, um, what do you think are some of the actionable steps that people can take in ensuring the preservation of music while it's like under attack, because whenever you have like a country over 40 years or more under attack, it really prevents a lot of artistic expression to come out. So what do you think could be done from your perspective, to ensure that the culture or this specific artistic medium flourishes
Yeah.
despite the national problems that is pushing it down? It could be a
Yeah.
number of things, but we can maybe start with one and go down.
Yeah, like you said, then despite the national interest, I think that is the biggest contributing factor to it. I mean, everyone has different viewpoints about Afghan music in the first place, and that's kind of making it a static or stagnant. It's not growing basically because of those reasons. But what people can do is honestly educate themselves about the music. We have many artists who are actually putting out content online. All you have to do is just search for it, and I think it's important as an Afghan to understand musical history or Afghanistan's artwork and its art history. So I think educating yourself is one thing, and at the same token, artists should actually promote it more as well. So, I mean, myself, I believe I could do a bit of education to non-Afghans, or sorry, Afghans who don't have music knowledge, and I think that's the way to sort of get people to preserve the essence of Afghan music.
One is to kind of promote it so audiences could listen to it. That's one way, and
Yeah,
then the creation of it. I mean, what? Yeah, I mean that's another thing that perhaps since you're doing it, you're like an example of somebody who's taken charge of being kind of a protagonist in terms of trying to preserve it, bring it into this new genre. Do you think that's also easy for others who may have musical talents to be able to bring that into the scene, kind of into the fusion space, I guess? Is
yeah.
that
So
one way, like to save it through fusion?
Um, I guess in one way it is to save it through fusion. I see where you're heading with that, um, because in Afghan music there is a bubble, and that bubble is, I guess, wedding music, and everyone's
Yeah,
doing the same thing at the moment, where they're buying a keyboard and doing everything on that, and so it's like,
yeah,
um, yeah, I think they should just break out of the norms a little bit
yeah,
and explore what other cultures have been doing. And I'm not saying like try to copy other cultures. I'm just saying just experiment a bit more.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mm.
No, that's a valid point because it's kind of that problem exists in certain other. I know, for example, India is kind of overly saturated with Bollywood or the film music. So from what I'm getting from your examples is that the Afghan music currently is being stuck with one genre, which
Yeah,
is the wedding music. Um, yeah,
yeah. I mean,
yeah,
it's not a bad thing. Of course, we should keep that because that's
right,
integrity. We don't have that many concerts. We don't have that many events, unfortunately, because we're spread over all over the world, especially on
yeah.
Australia, where it's a drought here with music. So
Mm-hmm.
weddings is the only place where a musician can actually or an artist can make money from it or a living.
Yeah, yeah.
I have friends who purely depend on that.
Yeah. So we need more avenues and through which an artist could make money or make revenue so it can preserve different types of art. Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah,
true, so true. Yeah.
yeah. And I should also add, you mentioned fusion music, so I think that is a way to monetize the music from as well, because scalability through platforms like Spotify and Apple Music, etc. yeah, that's another revenue stream.
Yeah. So good. So good.
Mhm.
Well, this takes us to the end of it went pretty fast. I know once we started geeking out about
Yeah,
music. I thank you so much for being in the show, on the show, and yeah, and sharing your thoughts. And I wish you all the luck in the world, man.
thank you so much, Misaf. Honestly,
Yeah,
pleasure
and
to be on.
of course,
Yeah,
and we'll put links and everything to your work. So audiences, if you loved his music, please go ahead and check out the links in the description and check out Idris John and everywhere and some of his music. So thanks again, Idris John, for being on the show.
thank you. Glad to
Or
be.
Drez, one of the two.
That's it.
thank, thank you.
Yeah, have a good one.